Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Silvestro Micera, and he is he's a professor at EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland, and he is working on robotic systems for neurorehabilitation and lots of neural interfaces with central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, hybrid neuroprosthetic systems, which we talk about in the show, basically using soft devices to interface with the body for neuroprosthetics for people who have lost their arms and legs. So very cool stuff. We had a very nice conversation. Enjoy. Silvestro Micera, pleasure to have you on the show. You are a professor at EPFL, and you are developing implantable neural interfaces, robotic systems for rehabilitation and control of movement. And you're integrating into the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and then developing hybrid neuroprosthetic systems. So pleasure to have you on the show. I've heard a lot about you. Do you want to explain your work and what you do a little bit in better detail than I just did?
Sure. First of all, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here, for your interest. So what I try to do is to develop implants and to use implants in the peripheral and central nervous system to restore sensorimotor and autonomic function in people who lost them for different kind of disabilities or disorders, going from amputation, neurological disorders, stroke, spinal cord injury, moving now recently also to cardiovascular problems, so the possibility of restoring the right vagus nerve neuromodulation or this kind of things. So mainly implants plus robotics to help people to improve their quality of life after issues, different kind of issues.
Very cool. Yeah, and I know that EPFL, Dr. Stephanie Lacour as well, you guys are very much into the compliant implants. You're not doing, hard silicone glass. You guys are going more softer, polyimide. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, the idea is that when you try to implant something in the nervous system, you want to reduce the invasiveness, the damage you are generating. And that's why going a bit softer, it's better because then you are becoming more compliant with the system you want to enter. And this is going to generate less damage, less reaction of the tissue, and very likely longer term usability of your implants. So in that sense, the reason is that the softer, the better for the long-term usability, which is for us working in neuroprosthetics, the next achievement. To have something not working for a few months or maybe a couple of years, but for 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, definitely. If you go, for a very major surgery, then you don't want to have to do that every month. And then you've worked in the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Is there one that needs to be more compliant? Is there one that needs to be softer? I mean, I think you'll make the case for periphery needing to be softer, right?
Yeah, I think the main difference is more related, the real difference to where you are going to implant. So, for example, if you go on the surface, could be of the spinal cord or the cortex, or around the nerve, then you can be very soft. You should be and you can be very soft. If you want to enter the nerve or if you want to enter the cortex, then it's a bit more challenging because you want to be very soft where you are in, but to enter it, you need to be a bit more stiff to penetrate it. So in that sense, if you look at epicortical for electrocorticographic signals, then they can be extremely soft, what Stephanie does, for example. But if you want to go for intraneural, then you have to find kind of a trade-off between what you would like to do and the fact that in any case you have to enter it.
So there's not anything like differences between the amount of movement that these different portions of the body experience, right? Like the peripheral nerve, it's stretching, it's maybe in a leg or something like this, so it's thrown all over the place, right? But the brain is kind of inside of a helmet, so it doesn't maybe move as much.
That's partly true because this is true, but at the same time you have a lot of micro movement in the cortex So the cortex does oscillate over time. So it is not a fixed system, even if it is in the helmet. But of course, you are right. I mean, for peripheral, then you could have way more stresses due to the movement. That's definitely true, at least for some of the peripheral. Then again, it depends on, for example, if you go for sensorimotor, it is often true for the legs you were mentioning. But if you go for the autonomic, they are still nerves. But since they are inside the body, close to the internal organs, then the movements there are less important. So again, it's really related to the specific application. Probably you are right. Sensory motor nerves are definitely moving more than the cortex, but the problem is in any case still there in any kind of application.
So soft as possible always.
Yes, but again with certain limits, because if you want to enter something, then it becomes more complicated.
Okay. And then you have one of your interests is hybrid neuroprosthetic systems. Can you explain this? What is this?
Yeah, in this case, the idea is to combine the implants with so electrodes implanted in the nerve, for example, with robotic devices. So, if you think about a prosthesis with a bidirectional connection with the peripheral nerve, you have the robotic part and you have the neural part. And in that sense, and it is the same for brain to machine interface. If you make brain decoding for controlling robots, for example, you have both components. And it is very important because in some way you can play with the hybridness in a smart way. Think about that. If you have a prosthesis, a dexterous hand prosthesis, the amount of information you can extract from muscular signals is limited in general. So you cannot control very well single finger. You can do something, but the quality of the control will be limited. At the same time, you can think of adding semi-autonomous control in the prosthesis. So the robot can help you with some kind of autonomous control, which can cope with the limited information you can get from the interface. So this is what other people, my colleague and friend Kosemi Yan did, combining EEG with smart wheelchairs. So if EEG is a good signal, but not super good, it's very noisy. The amount of information you can extract is limited. You can do something, but not many things. At the same time, you can get a bit of information and provide information to the wheelchair, and the wheelchair can have autonomous navigation systems, for example, obstacle avoidance systems. So in some way, the interesting part of the hybridness is that you can get the best of both of them and try to make it more usable and more effective for the final user.
So it's maybe like reducing the dimensions of that tool by making it basically, on and off or kind of a linear thing. And then, but what the tool actually does is a little bit more complicated and maybe follows a more natural form, something like that. Like I've heard that the legs actually, we have a lumbar section of, the spinal cord, and so the brain actually doesn't control the legs. It's the lumbar part that does all the complex muscle movements, and what the brain just does is just go on, walk. Is it something like that?
Exactly. I mean, the idea is exactly to try to copy what we always do. I mean, in general, the brain is very sophisticated, but as you said, it doesn't need to specify that muscle movement in a very precise way. The spinal cord, a colleague of mine would say, is a second brain and is helping the brain to do the details of the motor commands. And we can do the same combining the robotic part with the neural part.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's pretty clever. Good way to get around it, like a low information
Mhm,
bandwidth.
mhm.
Um, And then one of the papers that you recently published actually was talking about enhancing the body with extra hands or fingers. Do you want to talk about this? And if this overloads the brain, if it's possible, like if we could even, conceive of that. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, that's something which is becoming very popular again in hybrid systems. So how you can augment, it's more science fiction. If you want, it's still really science fiction, but people are moving in that direction. So how you can add a third arm, a fourth arm, a sixth finger to the human hand, making something more, doing something more. The issue there is that the principle. If you look at Doctor Octopus, the bad guy with Spider-Man. The idea is that the guy can control the extra arms in parallel to the natural ones. Okay, so it's not substitution, like for example we were talking about prosthesis. It's really augmentation because means that we should be able to control more than two arms, more than five fingers, and these kind of things. And this is interesting, from one viewpoint, because it's really a challenge from the scientific, neuroscientific viewpoint. Are we able to do that? How much can we do? Because at the end, we are born with two arms. Can we really learn when we are? I'm 48. When you are kind of old, less plastic. Let's put in this way. Can you learn to control a third one? So you have the neural resources to do that, the cognitive ones. And at the same time, how you can do that. So the challenge is, can you really do that with the current existing neural interfaces? What kind of information you can extract, how you can provide information back. The other thing is, we know that sensory feedback is important, but at the same time, you want to convey this extra sensory feedback without disturbing the existing natural one, and so on. And to add another layer of complexity, clearly, right now, it's unfeasible to think to ask a healthy person to to have an implant in the cortex. And clearly, non-invasive solutions are limited with the amount of information, as we were saying before, you can extract from them. So the two possible in the long term, you can think, Elon Musk and Neuralink, you can think of adding many electrodes, many implants, and you can do more in that direction, implanted, maybe in 20, 30 years from now. But clearly now the two solutions to make something like augmentation possible is to constrain yourself in the task. So, for example, a colleague of mine, Tamar Makin, is using leg movements, feet movement for controlling the sixth finger. So, in that sense, okay, you are kind of increasing your dexterity, reducing the possibility to walk, clearly, right? Then is for a task where you are sitting doing something. So, the more you constrain the overall scenario, the more you can use, let's say, other motor commands for something else, like controlling the legs, for controlling an extra arm. The more you want to be generalizable with the kind of task, so to do everything together, the more complicated it is. At the same time, the other advantage can come, as we were saying for the hybrid system before, from the robotic part. So you can think of providing very limited high-level information to the robot, and then the robot is going to do most of the control autonomously. Now think about the third arm with a camera, and the camera is supposed to check for my mobile. So I can just say start, just one bit, and then the extra arm is going to do that specific task. Again, you are getting augmentation, but reducing the amount of task you can do. So clearly, if you think about the overall idea, the only way is to reduce, to constrain yourself in a way or another to make it working. And it's going to be in this way maybe for the next, I don't know. It's difficult to make prediction, but many years to come.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, I was just talking about this concept with a friend of mine yesterday, and that was exactly my analysis. Is if you do have, like, Dr. Octopus's 4 extra limbs or something like this, I think it would take a very long time to be able to learn how to use that, almost like a child learning to walk. And so it might take years to like really be able to use everything in parallel. But I think it could be possible. But definitely, if you constrain it, and if it's just like, okay, you're just telling the octopus hands to walk or something like that, and then it figures it out on its own, then that would be much, much faster and much more
Mhm,
efficient.
mhm.
That's really cool. And so do you think, okay, so let's say my my analysis is correct, that it is possible, but or do you think it would be possible, like even with years of training, could you have a Dr. Octopus, could you have 4 extra arms and legs, or would that overload the brain?
Hmm, I don't know, honestly. I mean, maybe again you are going to reach a limit very likely, and maybe the limit is going to be even subject dependent. If you think about my ability to play tennis with Roger Federer ability to play tennis, of course, he had a lot of practice more than I do. But even without that, or even with the same amount of practice, I doubt I would have become Roger Federer. So what I'm expecting is that maybe 3 arms could be possible, but it's going to take, as you said, a lot of time. But in any case, we are going to reach a limit clearly sooner or later. And again, the limit could be person subject dependent, because the ability to do physical exercise, for example, for me and you is different. So this is going to reflect in a way or another also in these kind of things.
Okay, yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, subject dependent too. Yeah, this is really interesting. So this next question is kind of suggested by a friend, Peter Schlecht. He's the founder of BrainGrid,
Mhm.
and we've had a lot of fun, talking about this paper. But do you have a favorite paper that you want to explain, or one of your favorite papers that you kind of want to go over?
You mean mine?
Yes,
My
yes,
papers? Yeah, maybe
yes.
one that I really like because it's a bit controversial, and I have one of my friends and colleagues, Zeeman Bensmaya, who is a great expert in neuroscience and neuroprosthetics, always going against it, which I love because it's a good way of interacting with smart people. Is a paper we published in Science Robotics 2 years ago. The first name is Danna. And the idea of this paper, when you make implants in the peripheral nerve for amputees and you stimulate, you elicit natural touch sensation. So the person can feel something at the phantom hand, touching the different fingers, the palm, and these kind of things. But it's very difficult to elicit. I would say that between me and my colleagues, only a couple of times we've been able to do that, to elicit position information. So sensation of finger movement or wrist movement. Not many cases, and very unreliable. Maybe because proprioception is the summation of different sensory information: the stretch of the skin, the Golgi tendon, the spindle reflex. So I mean, there is a lot of combination of things. Maybe. So what we tried, but at the same time, it is important. There is a very famous video, I don't know whether you saw it, of Roland Johansson, a Swedish neuroscientist. And the guy is showing that if I make a denervation of your position information and you are not able to have position information in your fingers, you are not able to light a match. So it's very difficult even to do something simple. So what we tried, to make the story short, what we tried to do in that paper was to combine the natural tactile information with a remapped sensation for position. So we took a couple of channels of the electrode, we stimulate, and then we train very quickly, in a matter of minutes, this subject to be able to recognize that that specific sensation was the opening and closing of the fingers of the prosthesis. And what was very interesting was that the guys were able to use it extremely well together with the tactile information, also with increased cognitive tasks, with a huge number of tasks. So, meaning that really we can do a lot of different things. Going back to the learning phase and the training phase, what we do in general now is to rely on the ability of the subject to provide information immediately. You stimulate, the subject tells, I feel something at my index finger, that's it. But we can use, virtual reality, training approach, whatever, to improve the stuff that the subject can feel. They can learn to remap something, and maybe will not be natural, probably, but definitely will be functional. So the reason why I love this is because it's controversial, but also because it shows that we are just scratching the surface of what we can do. With longer term implants in real life applications, probably the subject will be able to do way more and to exploit way more the technology we provide.
Wait, so what was the controversial part?
The controversial is that Sliman does not believe that remapping is useful and that it can be easily integrated in the overall sensory motor system. Which is,
That it's fixed.
yeah, the idea is that even if you learn it, this remapping is not going to be really functionally useful. So you're not going to exploit it completely in a way or another. It is probably true, but is completely the issue, E- Even if I'm able to give you a sensation, maybe not as exploitable as the natural one, but decent enough, it will be, I believe, a plus for the patient. So I would not stop ourselves because we're not able to do something natural to avoid providing something which could be useful in a way or another for the patient.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, flying is not natural for humans, but we can still do it.
Yeah,
So,
and by the way, sorry, if you think about that, since I live I'm now in Florence, which is where more or less Leonardo da Vinci was born. If you think about flying, when Leonardo tried to use a very biomimetic approach, he was not able to do that. You know what happened to his best friend? Um, what's the name of the guy? I don't remember anymore. Um, Zoroastro or something. He was a friend of him, and Leonardo told him, "Do you mind to try my wings? They're really biomimetic." And the guy tried. He went up on a hill in Florence. He tried to fly, and it was, let's say, really a disaster. So again, biomimetic can be a choice. We also published a paper with two colleagues about soft embodiment and soft biomimetic. You need to take inspiration, but it's not necessarily true that the purely exactly biomimetic solutions are always the way to go. And flying is exactly the solution. If you look at airplanes, they are kind of biomimetic, right? But they are not really birds.
yeah, even now, 500 years after Da Vinci, we still haven't really been able to figure it out, like how to make it exactly biomimetic, and yeah, we don't necessarily want to because there's no birds that are the size of a soccer stadium.
Exactly.
So
That's the other thing. Yes.
so that was your favorite paper. What about is that different than your most popular paper? Do you know maybe one of your most popular papers, and do you want to explain that one?
I would say that the most popular is probably the first paper we did with a patient implanting the electrode. The same approach, but the very first one with the first amputee to show that sensory feedback it is restorable and exploitable in real time. And what I like of this paper, it is very well cited, of course, very popular. But I would say what I like of this paper was really, the feeling of the adventure altogether. There was an incredible team of people. I was very lucky because there were students who are now colleagues of mine around the world, and it was a very nice team, and it was very nice working together. It was kind of the pioneering idea of working together, trying to do something that more or less nobody was able to do it before, at least in that specific way. So
Hmm.
I really love that.
Yeah. So why did you get into this field? I mean, amputees, neuroprosthetics, that's a, pretty big, that's a pretty specific thing. Do you have some kind of experience with this in your personal life?
Uh, I will make you laugh, I guess, but I did it because as a teenager, I was reading a lot of comics like Spider Man, Iron Man, and these kind of things. And then there was, I mean, you are too young probably to remember that, but there was the $6 million Man TV show. And there was a guy at the very beginning, that there is this astronaut collapsing and destroying himself totally. And there was a voice of a doctor saying, "We have the technology, we can rebuild him." And I was 15, and I said, "I want to be that guy. I want." And I mean, I know it sounds weird and a bit funny, but that's the way it is. I decided that I wanted to be the guy saying, "We have the technology, we can rebuild him." Sorry, I mean it's a bit funny, but
That is funny, but I've heard a lot of people mention that. I actually haven't seen. I've seen the introduction for the $6 million. I've never seen an episode, so I need to see it because a lot of people have listed this as an inspiration. And I had something similar. Like there was some. Oh, it was almost like Black Mirror or Twilight Zone. It was a
yes.
similar kind of show to that. And there was like a guy with nanotechnology, and he took these nanobots, and then the nanobots were learning, and he could breathe underwater and do all this like hard. He had very strong skeletal system. And I was just like, wow, that's so cool. But then I don't know about you. I don't know if you've watched $6 Million Man since then. I watched it again. I was just like, wow, this is so bad. This is so scientifically inaccurate. Like, there's
Of
no way
course.
this could happen.
But
Did this happen to you?
yeah, yeah, of course. But just to give you an idea, the show was so funny at the end. Then to make the Bionic Man going faster, they were making a slow down movement. So the guy was kind of going at the rallying, very slow. To say that they were making very slow, otherwise it should have been impossible for you to see that. And some other things. I mean, he had, I guess, a bionic eye, and he was completely inaccurate. Yes, I mean, clearly he was a bit naive. If you look with the eyes of a scientist after many years, 30 years more, then clearly you see a lot of, inaccurate things, let's say in this way. But still, the idea is, I still find it very appealing. The only thing I stop when I do public presentations, I stopped presenting the $6 million Man movie, the one at the beginning, because nobody, unless it's a boomer like me, nobody knows it anymore, right? I mean, people in the 20s or even in the 30s, they never saw it. But other than that, yes, he's quite inaccurate in some things, but I still love looking at it.
I have to watch the show. It's really, I've heard it too often, I think. And they should really reboot it because we need more people to be inspired by this kind of stuff, whether becoming scientists or not. So yeah, it's really cool. um, what are your biggest challenges right now in your research?
There are many, of course, but I would say at least two. One, to bring everything we are doing, and in particular the amputee part, to the clinics, to the real clinics, because now we tested in 5 patients or 6 patients. So what we are trying to do right now is to have a fully implanted system, which can be then provided to the patient at home, as I was saying before, for good. So that's definitely one challenge, to make it really clinically available. At the same time, is to use the same technology. At the beginning, we were talking about soft implants, and the time electrodes developed by my colleague Thomas Stiglitz are now extremely good, to the point that now we are starting using for quadriplegics to restore grasping in paralyzed people, and blind people to restore vision, implanting them in the optic nerve. So let's say exploiting what we did for amputees, bringing it to clinical practice, real, exploiting the technology for other application, paralyzed people, blind people, these kind of things. And then there is the huge field of autonomic nervous system stimulation. I cannot tell you much now because we are still checking for the results. But for example, For cardiovascular issues, we are getting incredibly interesting results. So the idea, let's say, is to move also, because if you're able to stimulate the autonomic nerves, you can go for inflammatory process, infertility, cardiovascular, diabetes, osteoporosis, even cancer. So I would say if I were me 20 years younger, I would say sensory and motor is cool, but the future is probably, I mean, before for my retirement in 20 years is autonomic, because there are. I mean, I was just reading a paper while waiting of a colleague, Warren Tyler, on colon stimulation using electrical stimulation. You Very interesting. You can do an incredible number of new things with this approach.
Yeah, I completely agree. For me, the bioelectronic medicine, this autonomic system stimulation is just, that's the most amazing thing. I hadn't heard about for infertility, but I had heard about, diabetes, osteoporosis, and, addiction and like all this kind of
Yes.
crazy stuff. I mean, yeah, again, I was talking with somebody yesterday, and it's like, it just feels like it's too much. It's like, it can't be real because it fixes everything, but, it does somehow. So
Yes, of course.
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, as you said, I mean, we don't know yet how far we can go. It seems very interesting, but maybe it's not going to work in most of these things. But definitely is a new territory to explore.
Yeah, definitely. And then you're doing this translational work. You're basically not necessarily taking devices and putting them to people. You're kind of more the process or the procedure and having that go into the clinic. How does that work? I mean, is this, I mean, obviously it's a very difficult process. They talk about the valley of death. Is there something similar to this with just bringing it into the clinic?
It is complicated. It is complicated, of course, because the very first step is that to go for a real clinical application, then you need. We created 2 or 3 companies recently. It's not something that a university professor can really do, because you need to go for venture capitalist. You need to go for millions. I have a friend of mine who made a company at the EPFL working on deep brain stimulation. And once he got, I guess, 15 millions. And then I met him by chance. And I told him, oh, congratulations. And he told me, for what? These 15 millions arrived on my desk, kind virtually, and they disappeared immediately because we needed to do A, B, C, D, and E, and it was already 15 millions. So it is really a huge amount of money. And for really, and the other big problem in our case, in most of the cases, there are niche. So I mean, the number of, and which is good for the patient but bad for the market. The number of amputees, the number of people with spinal cord injury, thanks God, there are not many. But this means that making a company for this is even more challenging than doing it for Parkinson, which is challenging as well. But in this case, you have also small numbers. So this is kind of rare disease. Some sooner or later, maybe creating foundations, kind of something supporting in a different way. Maybe we should also look at different business models in some cases, maybe. But definitely, what I believe for the prosthesis, I'm reaching already a point where then it's not anymore a university problem, it becomes a company problem. Because you cannot make really, or you sell your idea to to an existing company, and you make a new one, or somebody else makes a new one. But clearly, it's not. It's a different game, if you want. But for me, it's important to reach the point where the next guy or the next company or whatever can start from. When you show that the system it's ready, it can be integrated, it work over long term, then of course going from 10 subject to 100 patient is again another game. But reaching the 10 means already that you move the field a bit in the right clinical translational direction.
Hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. it's all these different steps and everything like this, and yeah, like we were saying, the money that you get, it's not your money. Like people are like, wow, you got so much money, but it's a loan, and you're gonna have to pay it back, and
Yes,
probably a lot of interest too. But
yes.
yeah, so you're kind of more at this 10 patient level. You're approaching that level, right?
Yeah, I mean, in general, yes. I mean, if you think about, you have always the first in human, and then you go from 1 to 10, and this is what we are doing for the amputees. While, for example, for quadriplegics, we are still at the first in human. So you have different steps. In some cases you are closer. For example, we also make non-invasive stimulation for stroke patients. Then we have a company on that. So let's say it depends on the cases. You go from the first in human to the 10 patient, and then in some cases you help also even farther. But I would say for the amputees, we are now ending the phase where I can do my own stuff as a professor with 10-ish of subjects. And then I have the meeting at 4 o'clock, by the way, is about that, to see whether we can close the loop and do really the next 5 or 10 patients. And then after that, clearly, if this works, we have to find a way to exploit it industrially in a different way.
Hmm. Very cool. And so I know the process a little bit in the U.S. Is it different in Switzerland? This translational work?
No, I think it works pretty much in the same way.
Okay.
I guess maybe Swiss Medic, which is the equivalent of FDA, maybe it's a bit tougher, but I don't know because I have no experience, honestly, of FDA, so I cannot tell you. They are very rigorous, which is honestly something which could complicate life, no doubt, but is important. So, frankly speaking, I prefer to have a regulatory body which is a bit more tough, but help me doing things in the right way. Because, at the end is a big responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. And then after that, you would expand later, or would you stay in Switzerland?
No, in terms of actually the implants we do for the amputees are in Italy, in an hospital in Italy, in Rome. But in general, I would say clearly when you go for more than 5 or 10 patients, then you have to go for a clinical trial, could be European, even worldwide. You have to make it larger because, again, the number of patients we are talking about, it's not huge. And in any case, it's difficult for if you go for 20 or 30 patient implanted, doing all of them in the same hospital is extremely complicated because it's really a huge effort in terms of staff, in terms of funding. So clearly, then you have to come with a network of clinical center uh, to work together on the same topic. So sharing data, sharing patients, and these kind of things.
So it's more difficult to do it all in one hospital. I would think that it'd be easier. The skills would transfer a little bit easier.
To a certain limit, yes. So if you want to go to do 3, 4, 5 patients in more or less in parallel, a bit shifted in time, one hospital is the best way to go. If you want to do 50 patients or 40, 20, 30, so let's say 4 or 5 times more, then unless you want to do it in a very long period of time, if you want to do in 2 or 3 years, it could be complicated
Okay.
because all these patients they require, at least now, maybe in the future when it's going to be a product, it will be different. But right now they need a lot of attention. We have to be very careful with what we do to avoid any problem with the patients. So clearly, it's going to be complicated to do everything in the same place.
Yeah. What is I mean, if you had to guess, maybe what's a timeline, a hopeful timeline of when all this could
Uh,
happen?
I don't know. I mean, the planning is to do at least a couple of new implants, depending on the COVID situation. I would say in 1 year from now. Uh, and we also created a startup company which is mainly focused on leg prosthesis. And they are also planning, I have a small part of shares in the company. They are now starting a clinical trial also for legs. So I would say that hopefully in 4 or 5 years from now, we will have a clear understanding whether this idea could become a real product with a real clinical impact.
Okay. I'll have to have you on the show at that time to give an update for how it
Yes,
goes.
of course. Thanks a lot. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, Dr. Silvestro Micera, this has been very interesting. I've enjoyed this. Lots of interesting research. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, I think we touched more or less everything. Maybe the only thing I want to emphasize, going back to what we started, is the importance of the enabling technology. So when you have the more or less soft, more or less flexible, when you find a good interface, then it's extremely important to use it. And this is what I'm trying to do for more than one application, because finding an interface which works very well, reliable over a long time is kind of a treasure. So when you find it, go and use it as much as possible, not only quote unquote with the application you design it for, but also for other applications. That's maybe the final remark I can leave you about my experience.
Yeah, definitely. If you find something that's close to perfect, then you can stop and you can focus on the other things. That's very interesting. Excellent. Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your interest and the question and the time. Thanks a lot.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.